Moshi Moshi.
Hello?
I'm Zeb Ramsbotham,
And I'm Annie Ramsbotham.
and we're the Rambling Ramsbothams.
Our journey might be rambling, but we hope this podcast isn't.
So welcome to this episode, which is going to be all about our Matsumoto bike tour.
Yeah, we made it.
Yeah, so if you listened to the previous episode, you heard us talking about planning a bike trip, and this episode is about the execution of the plan.
The aforementioned bike trip.
Yeah, so we went and did it, and some big, kind of broad overview stats. It was a 7-day trip, which ended up being 430 miles with 34,800 feet of climbing. And for the non-Americans, that's 690 kilometers with 10,600 meters of climbing. And in total, that took us 30 hours, and we went through 4 prefectures.
30 hours of ride time. There was a lot more time on the bike. There was a lot more time just holding my bike and wearing bike clothes.
Yeah, I'd have to look at, the actual, total time.
Mm-hmm.
That's, just ride time. But yeah, so we're going to talk about the overview of the trip in this podcast. So we'll go day by day and kind of talk about how things went, what we liked, maybe what we didn't like. I don't know if there's anything you didn't like.
Yeah, overall it went pretty well. But yeah, day one.
Yeah.
What was that?
The first day, we, of course, woke up here in our house, and we rode from Uchinada to Hida, which was 121 kilometers with 1,765 meters of climbing, or 75 miles and 5,790 feet, and it took us 5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a really nice day because we've done some of these roads before, but we left Uchinada in Ishikawa. We rode through Toyama prefecture, where we met up with the Jinzu River, and we followed that into Gifu, and eventually ended up in Hida. And so that was kind of the broad overview of the route for the first day.
Yeah. It was the third longest ride of the trip, but 5,700 feet in 75 miles is pretty good. It's not a whole lot of climbing. It's not nothing, so we were, making progress, but I felt pretty good after we finished.
It's a nice in-between, so I guess just as a reference point, when we lived in our college town of Boone, North Carolina, most rides there, you averaged 100 feet of elevation per mile. So on a typical 30-mile ride, you would probably end up with 3,000 feet of elevation. Versus the Piedmont, or the middle of the state in North Carolina, where I'm from, usually per mile you would do about 50 feet. So all of our riding was somewhere in the middle of that. So yeah, it's a pretty decent amount. That's a good amount of climbing.
Every day during our bike trip, not every day, but most days we woke up at 4 a.m. and we were trying to get on the bike by 5. And that's mostly because the summer is so unbearably hot and the sun rises at 4:30, so we figured that if we could get out there right when the sun was coming up, we could knock out the most of our ride before it became really brutal. And that did work out really well. So that first day was the first 4 a.m. wake up.
Yeah, which maybe was a little jarring because we weren't really in the routine yet of doing that.
It got easier. And it got way easier to go to sleep at 7:30.
Yeah, because of course we were
tired.
We were resting up until the bike trip. So yeah, falling asleep the night before the first day was a little rough because we were well rested and I hadn't been riding. And
yeah, I was so nervous, excited about the morning.
Oh.
So I was laying there
well,
we're gonna ride.
A little bundle of energy. But yeah, it was a really good day. What was I guess you liked the route in general, hopefully.
Yeah, so I don't know if I have a favorite part from that first day, but I did really like the the coffee shop that we had lunch at.
Yeah, that was really nice.
We arrived really early. We started at 5 a.m. and then we were already at our destination by 10:30 in the morning. And of course check-in's not until 3, so we were well, we did it, but yeah, now we're got a lot of time to kill. But there was luckily a really nice campsite and a cafe kind of restaurant right next to each other, pretty close to our guest house, so we kind of hung out there, washed some clothes in the campground sink, and then had lunch, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it was like a brunch because I think the cafe opened at 11 or something like that.
Yeah.
We were probably in there.
We washed clothes first and we're like starving for lunch, but it was like 10:30 in the morning.
Yeah, it took a bit of time for like our bodies, I guess, to adjust and get used to that flow. But yeah, it was
the cafe.
It was pretty good.
It was called Cafe Nanook. I don't know what Nanook means. It's not Japanese, I don't think. But the logo was a polar bear, and it made me think about Shirokuma Cafe, which is like, I guess, a kid's anime. Sometimes the jokes, it's never like mature, but sometimes the jokes, I'm like, maybe they were making this for adults, but also it's so like cute. It seems like it's for kids.
It was probably like kids' cartoons back in America.
Maybe.
Like sometimes there's some kind of like jokes that'll go over the head of kids.
Yeah, it's
for
never
the parents.
like inappropriate, but anyway, if you're looking for like an easy anime, and they have a manga that people recommend for beginning to read. Yeah, I watch that a lot.
Yeah, do you remember why he said that they named it that?
Yeah, we asked him because I told him it reminded me of that anime, and he said that his son looked like a little polar bear when he was born.
Yeah, because their mascot or their logo was a polar bear.
But that's kind of a weird thing to say, that your son looks like a little polar bear. I don't know. Maybe like cute and chubby and
yeah, I don't know.
Pale.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a really nice day, and the riding was pretty gentle, especially towards the end. And then from that cafe, we went to our first guest house. So every night we stayed in a different guest house, kind of unintentionally. I didn't really mean to book all guest houses during the trip, but that's just how it worked.
Because we were riding to towns and not like big cities, there weren't really a lot of hotels, like the Western kind of idea of a hotel.
A lot of hotels were just booked.
Oh, really?
And so we ended up in
I didn't even know that
different places.
They were like options, because it seemed like not, I don't know, when you think of like a hotel with like a ton of rooms, a ton of floors, there weren't that many large buildings that seemed like hotels, but yeah, the guest houses were fine. I kind of preferred that.
Yeah.
To see something different.
That first night we ended up at Guest House Tomo, which was a bit out of the way. It was in Hida, but not in like the city proper, kind of the Hida outskirts. It was really nice, but it was the homiest of the places we stayed.
It was definitely like a homestay.
Yeah, it felt like we were just in a dude's house.
Oh, we definitely were. Like, he just
yeah.
opened his front door and we were just in his living room. His kitchen, he had like, you know, like leftovers out and like dishes in the sink, which is not a problem, but it wasn't like he cleaned up for us.
Yeah.
Which is fine if he's fine with it.
Yeah, if you were expecting like a really nice, kind of like pristine condition, it wasn't really there.
It was a bit
cluttered, it was still good.
But it was very like welcoming. Like, it had a lot of things that kind of sterile hotel rooms or like guest houses wouldn't have.
Yeah.
Or not, like a ryokan where it's just you wouldn't have.
Yeah, and it was like a nice traditional house, and it really did have the fun feel of like, oh, we're like just staying in some
staying
dude's
with a friend.
house. Yeah.
And the upstairs where we were staying was super spacious and very clean because he lived downstairs, so upstairs was very nice.
Yeah.
And there was no AC, which is really the only complaint that I have.
Yeah.
Actually, really the only complaint I have is that because it was a traditional home with the sliding doors and the paper, you know, it's just paper between walls.
Yeah.
We were sharing it with a couple families, which is not a problem, but
I forgot about this.
One family had a baby and they arrived not late, but by 9 p.m. we were already asleep. And then the baby had been asleep, I guess, because it woke up and it started crying. And yeah, that was kind of, I was like, oh yeah, we're in a traditional house. Like, it just sounds like the baby is like right next to you.
Yeah, like in the room with you. I forgot about that.
Yeah. And I wanted to be like, I'm the baby.
Yeah.
Let me sleep.
Yeah, that wasn't the best, but
no, I felt bad for the parents because I'm sure that they were stressed, you know, like, oh, we have to, I mean, what can you do? You're like trying to get the baby to go down.
I mean, you could stay in somewhere that's not a
I
traditional guest house with paper walls.
I guess. It was only a problem because we were waking up so early. The baby did go to sleep eventually.
Yeah, but it was good because I was pretty excited to wake up early because I wanted to get on the road the next day because I was really looking forward to maybe more of the sights and scenes day 2, because day 1 was pretty like straightforward. Like it was we were just getting underway. And we've ridden through some of those areas before. But day 2 was Hida to a small town called Kanayama. And that day was 139 kilometers with 1,600 feet or 1,615 meters of elevation, which is 86 miles or 5,300 feet. And that day, it took us 5.5 hours.
Yeah.
So a bit longer, but not too much longer.
Yeah, and I had a lot of confidence after this day because although it was the same amount of climbing, it was the second longest day. And so I was like, all right, well, if I can finish this and feel as good as I feel, then doing just 10 more miles, and, you know, I didn't want to think about the extra elevation that was coming up, but I was like, I should be fine.
Yeah.
And for some context about where Hida is, because it may not be a place that you have heard of before, but Hida is an area that's in the northwest corner of Gifu prefecture.
Yeah.
So after we went from Ishikawa, we crossed the corner of Toyama into Gifu. That area, it used to be its own province before Japan had prefectures, but it's made up of Takayama, Hida, Garo, and Shirakawa.
Yeah. So that day we got to ride through a bunch of that. So we left Guest House Tomo, and we got to ride through like Hida proper, like the actual city of Hida. Mm-hmm. And then we rode out of that through Takayama, which is another like pretty up and coming famous mountain town.
I would really like to go back to that town actually.
Yeah, Takayama was cool.
Had a really nice historic area and a morning market.
Yeah, well, same thing for Hida. I really liked the historic district that we rode through. It was like really nice they had the like classic like canal roads.
Yeah.
But we did Hida to Takayama and then Takayama to a city called Gujo, which we had recommended by a friend that we met, which we mentioned in the last podcast. And then Gujo ultimately to Kanayama. But yeah, so Takayama was your favorite part of that?
No, Gujo was my favorite out of the day. But yeah, Takayama, I was just surprised because I'd heard of Takayama. Sometimes when people take day trips from Kanazawa, they'll go to Shirakawa-go to see the little thatched roof, the gassho zukuri houses. And I've similarly heard of people taking a day trip to Takayama, which is farther, so it's not as popular, but it's kind of like, oh, why don't we leave the city and go see this little historic village? It's much more of a city than Shirakawa-go, but I did see the appeal of like there is the history there and more restaurants and cafes and things.
Yeah, definitely there's a lot more going on, and similar to like Hida. So when we rode through Hida was like a small version of Takayama, and it had like kind of like similar scenery. But yeah, they were both super cool, and yeah, I like Takayama a lot. I would like to go back.
It was killing me.
And maybe spend a day or two there.
We rode along the river and we rode like through a morning market, but we were like 10 miles into an 85-mile day, so like we weren't going to stop. But I was like, don't look at I was looking at all the stuff in the stalls, but I love markets and like morning markets, so I was like, ooh, like look at this. And then I was like, no, like we have a mission.
Well, also, I mean, our bike bags, we couldn't really buy anything.
That is actually a really good limiter for me because I get a little, I don't know, I like things. I like trinkets.
Yeah.
But when you have a bike, you can only take so many trinkets with you.
Yeah, that does make it a lot more difficult because even like small things sometimes, like we saw in one of the, I'll talk about this later, but we saw like a Pokemon vending machine that it had like Pokemon cards and you could buy one out of the vending machine. I was like, oh, that's like really cool. I want to get one. But even that, like if I transport it, it would get like crumpled or it's just difficult.
That one, we have like pockets in our bags that would be no problem. But yeah, you just have to think a little bit more than if you have a car, you just shove whatever you want in the back.
It's just more difficult. But when we left Takayama, specifically the road that we rode along was called the Sesaragi Kaido. And Sesaragi apparently is the sound that babbling water makes. And it is, so it's interesting to note.
There's a lot of onomatopoeias in Japanese.
Tons. And I noticed when I was just kind of like scrolling through our route for Google Maps when we were planning this podcast to talk about it, that really almost every road we went on followed a river.
Yeah, there were a lot of rivers.
We were very river-centric, which makes sense because the river is going to be kind of the flattest, easiest grade.
Easiest way to get through a mountain.
Yeah, so it's just pretty interesting. But so yeah, that was like a really pretty road, and it was interesting that there really wasn't much traffic on it. Like, I don't really know why, because it's really beautiful. And so I thought in my head it was going to be a little bit busy with traffic, like cars, just people out sightseeing. But
there were a lot of motorcycles, but a lot of motorcycles, you could tell like they were just sightseeing. They weren't really in a rush, so that was really nice. They gave us like a ton of room when they passed. Sometimes they would wave, or like on a climb, this one guy like gave us a thumbs up when he passed us. That was funny. But yeah, when we peeked over that road and we descended into Gujo, that was probably my favorite part of the day, was Gujo.
Oh, I thought you were going to say the descent itself. I was like, really? Was it that pretty?
The descent
I don't remember it being like...
The descent was refreshing and longer than I expected, honestly. But I didn't really have a lot of expectations for Gujo because it's just kind of a town that this acquaintance we met mentioned, like, oh, maybe you would like it. And it's near where he lived. So, I don't know, in my mind, I just thought, like, he lives nearby and it's like a town he likes. Yeah. I didn't really think it would be, like, exceptional.
Well, I'm glad you liked it because in hindsight, we actually could have made that day quite a bit shorter.
Yeah,
because it was like a detour to get to Gujo, and then we had to climb up and out of Gujo itself.
Yeah.
Because we like lost tons of elevation going down there, and then had to regain it to get to Kanayama.
Yeah, it's kind of a riverside town. I liked it for two reasons. One of them is probably just so one of the reasons is because we had ice cream and the best French fries that I've had in Japan.
Those were really good
at
French
this
fries.
Cafe.
Yeah.
We keep getting these French fries. I'm not getting them anymore.
Well, you've gotten them twice. The first time I was kind of on board, and the second time I was like, are you really buying those again?
I thought there's no way that someone could sell fries this bad, and they do, because I got them twice. And
they're terrible.
They're at our grocery store. They have just pre-made food that you can buy, and it's usually fine and very cheap. And I was like, wow, they have French fries. I'll buy some French fries. How hard is it to mess up fries? And they're so dry, and I was just like, these are terrible.
They're kind of like if you took frozen French fries and just let them thaw. Like you didn't heat them like in an oven or like even microwave them. You just put them out.
So my bar was low, but I was like, I really want some French fries at the stop. Like some fried carbs sound amazing. Like towards the end of this ride. And then they were like warm and fried, and the outside was like extra crispy. Like, I don't know. They were kind of like Chick-fil-A waffle fries, but like crispier.
Yeah.
But the inside was still just as soft.
Yeah.
And for me, it's a pro. Probably if we had been with my mom, it would have made her uncomfortable because she's vegetarian. But you could tell that they just deep fried everything in the same oil because they had kind of like...
Yeah, there was a bit of a chicken element.
Yeah, there was like a meaty taste, I guess. And I thought it was tasty, but yeah, they definitely just like deep fried the fried chicken in the same oil as the French fries.
Yeah. So that was like...
That was a pro for me.
Yeah, that was a great stop and definitely a really nice detour. And of course, we got to see Gujo Hachiman's castle.
That was the real highlight. The fries were just a bonus.
Yeah, the castle was really cool, and it was really fun because as we were descending down, we like came around this one point where you could see the castle like up through the trees because it's a true mountaintop castle, which
it's the
most
really extreme like mountaintop castle that I feel like I've been to. Maybe the one in Fukui is close, where it was like the quote castle in the sky.
Yeah, but we didn't go to that one. We just looked at it.
And well, we looked at it from another mountain, like down onto it. But even that one, I guess because the area is so flat, that mountain didn't have to be that tall for it to be like above the town.
Yeah.
And this one, because the town is in a valley, part of the town is like up on the riverbanks kind of, and so the mountain has to be like really tall above everything. And when we were climbing, so luckily they let you park and walk up to the castle, but they let us ride our bikes all the way up there, which was really nice.
It was good.
And we were doing so many switchbacks. I was just like surprised that we still weren't at the top.
Oh.
I just didn't expect it to be really a mountaintop castle.
Yeah. That one was really cool.
But there's apparently a word for mountaintop castle, Yamashiro.
Oh.
So I didn't know that.
That's cool. I didn't know.
Yeah, Kanazawa's castle's not a mountaintop one.
Yeah, we're not Yamashiro. But after we saw the castle, we had our nice French fries. We had one more climb to do the day, and then we had to get up and over, and then we descended once again down to Kanayama. And there, Kanayama is the confluence of the Maze and Hida rivers, and so there we jumped in the river to kind of cool off from the hot day, and that was a really nice experience.
Yeah. It was so refreshing. The whole time I'd been thinking about, like, I can't wait until we get in the river. And
really?
Yeah. It's so nice.
I was really hoping that we'd be able to get into it, you know?
Yeah.
Because sometimes they're like inaccessible because they're so, I don't know the word, like they're so put into a channel, like a man-made channel. Most cities, the river is kind of inaccessible.
I guess they do that because if the rivers rise, you want there to be plenty of room for it to rise before there's a risk of coming out of the banks. But yeah, I also have another thing to mention about Gujo, the castle town. Gujo happens to be the fake food capital of Japan.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
And when I read this, I was putting emphasis on like it's the fake food capital, like it's the not real food capital.
Like they just make up foods?
No, like this place is the food capital and this place is like the fake food capital.
Yeah.
Like how sometimes people will say like Osaka is the food capital of the world.
Oh, I gotcha, yeah.
And I was like, well, what is a fake? No, they literally mean like the plastic food that you see outside of like in the window.
It's literally the fake food capital.
They make fake food, like plastic food. I don't know why, but I guess they're good at it and they just keep making it. And so now the majority of fake food models are made in this tiny town of Gujo. So that's something.
That is something.
Yeah. But back to our final stop in Kanayama.
Yeah, so
was there a reason that you picked Kanayama, or was it just like there was space?
So there was just space. So Gujo has this like month-long festival where they do some kind of like dance every night of August, I think. And so in planning the trip, when I was searching for hotels, Kanayama was the next closest place around Gujo that had availability that wasn't ridiculously expensive. And so that's how we ended up in Kanayama. So it was a bit of luck, really, that we went there, but I'm really glad we did because I liked it a lot. It was a pretty
sleepy town. It felt like, I don't know, it kind of felt seasonal. Like there weren't enough people walking on the street for how many buildings there were. It felt like to me.
Yeah,
like I just didn't feel like
I think it was just a small town.
I guess so. I just didn't really see a lot of people and I was kind of surprised. But we stayed actually on the top floor of an izakaya, and an izakaya, you might know, is a bar. And it's more than just, like when I say bar in English, if you were like, let's go to a bar, I would think that there's drinks and then like maybe we could get some finger food, like snacks.
Yeah.
But an izakaya is like a restaurant and a bar. Like you can get a lot of different meal foods along with a full bar service.
Yeah, but people are still there treating it like a bar.
Yeah.
Hammered. Because the
what
bartender...
What was that word for overserved that he told us?
It was something like yarabai or I can't really... I'd have to look it up. But yeah, he kept like telling us that like he was making fun of the people in there drinking, the bartender was. And he was like, him and him and him and him. And
yeah, he was like, they're all overserved.
Yeah, he's like, they're wasted.
Because people would say something and we'd be like, what? And he was like, overserved.
Yeah. It was really funny. That was one of my favorite experiences of the whole trip, though.
Was it?
Well, just because the whole T-shirt incident.
Okay.
So I'll tell the story real fast or try to be quick. There was a guy, I had recently been looking up cycling brands in Japan, and there's one called Susu, and it's located in Kyoto, and they make traditional Japanese clothing, so think kimonos, yukata, that kind of stuff. They also have a line of clothing that they call casual cycle wear, so it's cycling specific, but it's think like you're riding around on your town bike, you're going to the cafe. It's like cycling clothes for around town with traditional Japanese influence. It's pretty cool. And
it's pretty niche.
Yeah, it's pretty niche. And somehow they're partnered with Le Coq Sportif, who is also partnered with like the Tour de France. And so they make some pretty neat clothing. And at one point, we were getting ready to go to bed, and this guy walked by to go use the bathroom, and he was wearing one of their shirts. And I literally just learned about this company like that week or the week before.
It was pretty random. It's not a very big company. And it's only because you happen to like cycling.
Yeah. And so when that guy came out of the bathroom, I asked him, I was like, oh, like, is that this shirt? And he was so
he freaked
stunned.
out.
And he was like, Kyoto, like in Kyoto. And I was like, yeah, like they're based in Kyoto. They make clothes.
And before you had even said anything to him, he seemed like he was kind of the boss of some company, because we were sitting on the counter seat with this guy who apparently is like a big shot, and the bartender was like, this guy's a big shot. And he was like, ho, 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 like, no. But you could tell he was like, yeah, I am.
He said something like Kanayama boss.
Yeah.
And we were like, ooh.
Like, I think he works at the hospital. He's like pretty high up. But anyway, the two guys were like, oh, hey, like, you know, doing their little boss greeting. Yeah. And then you were like, oh, I know that shirt. And he was like, what?
Yeah, he said something like he's been wearing
he'd worn
their
it
clothing
for 5 years, and
Yeah.
no one had ever known what brand it was.
I think he said one time. He said one time someone recognized it.
Which is not a... I don't think it's that big a deal. I
don't
probably
think so
would have
either.
been like, oh, yeah, you know this brand too? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we both like bikes. That's pretty weird and cool.
Yeah.
But he was like, oh my gosh. And then he told the other boss guy, like, this guy knows this brand.
Yeah,
like,
he was so excited. And he like shook my hand and he said thank you so many times.
it was so shocking.
And then he went and sat down and he was like telling the story to everyone he was sitting
Yeah,
with.
because he was kind of drunk, so he was talking really loud, and he kept like pointing over at you and like
Yeah.
telling the story
And
again.
it was so funny. And then when we got up to leave, he was like, arigatou gozaimasu. Like he was like, it was like just this crazy, it was so funny.
I guess you made his day that you knew his shirt. I don't know why that's a big deal, but it was.
I don't either, but he was so pleased. I hope that he also tells that story. Like we're telling it. I feel like tells us for, I don't know. There was this crazy foreigner and he knew my shirt. Yeah. Anyway.
So weird.
Yeah, so that night we went to bed. And thankfully that one was really quiet.
Yeah,
Like-
so we were on top of that izakaya, but I was worried that all the people downstairs still partying, because we were going to bed at like 7:30.
Mhm.
Like right after dinner, we were like, well, good night. And it was really quiet. And upstairs, each of the rooms, there was only 3, and you just kind of like shut your little sliding doors and pulled the curtains, and you had your own private AC unit, which
that
was
was so nice.
a godsend.
Yeah.
And because it's such a small room, it was like just beautiful. The
Yeah,
weather
you could make
inside.
it like an ice box in there.
Or not weather, but
Oh,
you
and
know
I forgot.
what I mean.
It was storming really hard that night.
Yeah.
So it was like really peaceful.
I was going to mention
kind
that
of,
too.
and
The roof
I
had
forgot
like
about
the
that.
rain on it. And because we just had to go from downstairs to upstairs for like eating and sleeping, we didn't have to venture out into the weather. And we didn't even bring rain jackets because
True.
we were packing so light, I guess. So it was,
Yeah.
yeah.
That was
we
a
were
really
pleased.
nice experience. So we went to bed early that night and woke up the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So day 3, we were going from Kanayama to Tsumago-juku, which was 90 kilometers and 1,555 meters, or 56 miles and 5,100 feet. And that day it took us 4 hours. And
Yeah.
this one was pretty like straightforward. So we left Kanayama, we went south following the Hida River, and until we reached Shirakawa, which has no relation to Shirakawa-go. It's actually on the Shirakawa River, where Shirakawa-go is on the Sho River.
Mm-hmm.
And we followed the Shirakawa River through Higashi Shirakawa up to a different river. And then we followed that to Nakasendo, which eventually led us to the Nakasendo. And then we rode to Tsumago-juku.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And pretty much every morning, actually most meals we were eating at a convenience store. So like we had eaten dinner at that izakaya, but then the next morning, and pretty much every morning, we would stop by this one was a Lawson, and we'd get something and keep going. But yeah, I thought it was a really pretty route. That was also the morning that your crank became not loose, but like the little...
No, that was actually the other morning when we rode through Hida.
Oops. Yeah, Zeb's, like, there was a gap between the frame and his crank arm.
Yeah,
that
basically
shouldn't have been there.
with SRAM cranks, there's a lock ring that you install the crank and then you torque it down, and then you're supposed to spin the lock ring until it touches the frame or the bearing, and then you tighten it, and that prevents the crank from moving.
You're supposed to keep everything locked in.
Yeah, and I thought I had done that, but apparently I hadn't done it correctly. So at some point while we were riding, there was a little bit of play in my crank, so I had to just retighten the lock ring, and then we were
But
good to
I
go.
didn't realize, I guess we both didn't realize that it was just the lock ring, like, being loose. I thought that the whole crank was loose, and just in my head, like,
Yeah,
we
he
were
was
going to
very
be...
concerned.
Yeah, because in my head, like, the nearly 100-mile day was still coming up, and we were going to be, like, in the middle of nowhere on this mountaintop where we couldn't get a taxi or phone service, and your crank was just going to fall off. So...
Yeah, at first I was concerned.
a little, like...
Yeah, I was concerned at first because I thought I installed it correctly, and I thought I had done the lock ring thing correctly. But then once there was play in the crank, I realized I hadn't. So yeah, once I fixed that, I wasn't too concerned.
It was fine.
But yeah, that day
You
was,
really liked that T road.
Yeah, that was honestly one of my favorite stretches of the whole trip. And I don't really know why, but when we were riding through Higashi Shirakawa, there was kind of this other confluence of rivers. It was the Shirakawa and the Hida
Kawa
rivers.
just means river, so like
Yeah.
all the town names with Kawa. So Higashi Shirakawa literally means East White River.
Yeah. So when we left the Hida River and followed the Shirakawa River along the T Road, I don't know, it was just so pretty.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it had that nice, I don't know if you wouldn't really call it pastoral, but kind of like Japanese pastoral. Like, it was scenic countryside,
I mean, there
but
were
it
a lot
felt
of
lived in.
tea bushes and
Yeah,
stuff.
and there were like tea fields, so there weren't like pastures, but there were like tea fields. And the air had a nice fragrance from the tea fields that occasionally you would like catch while you were riding, and yeah, it was just really nice. And then there were like some campsites, so you could see families kind of, because families in Japan wake up super early too, and you'd see babies out walking at like 5 a.m. and you're like, who? Like,
there
what?
were a lot of really scenic, like we would come around a river bend and there would be a campground and you could like smell the morning campfire that they were like hanging out around, and it was just real cozy.
Yeah, so that road just had some really good vibes.
And Higashi Shirakawa is a town that is known for a very rare festival.
Which we've mentioned on this podcast before.
Yeah, so I don't know if you all remember, one week Zeb's word of the week was Tsuchinoko, which is a possibly mythical snake creature. That it's basically like a fat snake that has to hop.
Yeah, it's basically like a yokai, but some people say it's real.
And especially in Higashi Shirakawa, there's an excessive amount of sightings, they claim, but they do have a like Tsuchinoko hunting festival every year, and there is a prize reward, and it's been going for decades, but they've never given out prize money because no one has ever captured one.
Yeah, they have a Tsuchinoko bounty.
Yeah.
And we rode by like a little roadside station, and it was like a Tsuchinoko themed.
Yeah.
It was just so funny. We were like just kind of out there in the middle of nowhere, and we were like, wait, like we've seen this town on Google before, and I didn't mean to plan the route.
It was pretty random.
Because it was interesting. There were a few different roads we could have taken, but I thought that one seemed the most interesting. I didn't know the T Road or the Tsuchinoko stuff was going to be there, so it was just kind of a pleasant. Maybe that's another reason I liked it so much, because I had no expectations, and it was just a pleasant surprise that I was like, oh, this is actually like really beautiful back here.
Yeah, well, not that part wasn't really beautiful, but after that was my favorite part, where we got onto the Nakasendo. And so the Nakasendo we've talked about before, but it's like middle of the mountain road is what that translates to, and it's one of the 5 routes that was used to connect Tokyo to Kyoto, so like the old capital and the new capital in the Edo period. And there were 5 main roads that like postal workers and I don't know, just
I guess like
travelers.
Important messengers. It's kind of like the like Pony Express.
Yeah.
If you're in America,
US.
or I guess like back in old Greece, like the marathon, you would like run along a path and like pass along messages. That's like the Nakasendo, or any of the other 5 sendos, I guess, or whatever you.
Well, so there's 69 post towns on this. I don't know. I think it's like 450 kilometer distance between Kyoto and Tokyo, and so this is pretty close to the middle. But the portion from the town of Magome to Tsumago or Tsumago-juku is, we didn't know this, but it's the most well preserved part and therefore one of the most famous parts. And it's like a 7.5 kilometer section that has some of the most original trail, but the whole time there is like a true paved road now. So you can ride your bikes, you can take a bus, you can drive, or you can hike and go like on and off the paved road and the actual trail part.
Yeah.
But the Tsumago-juku, where we were ending up for the night, is actually the 42nd of 69 post towns. So that was cool. It's one of the best preserved too.
Yeah, it was a beautiful area, and this was another part where I was really glad that the route paid off, because you could actually kind of like ride around the mountain that we rode up and over. Like, so I think a lot of people don't really drive through there anymore. And
not if you're like not just going to sightsee.
Yeah, so we could have cut off a lot of elevation by going around. But I'm glad that we rode through it.
Yeah. I was going to say if you're a history buff, but even if you're not a history buff, it's such a cool place because you can you know how people are like, you can feel the history, but you
Yeah.
really can. I know it sounds really cheesy, but there were parts where like the road did come up really steep, and then at the top of the climb it turned from Gifu prefecture to Nagano prefecture, and I don't know, you could just tell, like, I bet there was a checkpoint there like a long time ago to like show your papers and prove like,
Wow.
oh, I can cross into this prefecture, you know, like at the top of the hill. And I don't know, you could just imagine like looking down the cobblestones, like how cool that view is. Probably very similar to what it was like 100 years ago.
And I do think if I could only pick two, I would recommend people go to Tsumago-juku, because that one was even less crowded, I think, because it was a little bit further on, so like very slightly more out of the way. But Magome-juku was pretty crowded, and I think maybe because it did have the very steep climb, and it had much more shops, and it had like the cobbled road down the center.
It does have a cool water wheel, if you want to see that.
Yeah, so Magome, you should really go to both, because I mean they're right next to each other.
Yeah.
But Magome-juku was very cool, but Tsumago-juku felt a little more like living history, I guess. Like it felt more like
people lived there. Magome felt more like people still maybe lived there, but more like you could get there and open your shop for the day and then go home that night. Yeah. It felt more like a shop street, which was still really
cool.
incredible. And if you walk from Magome to Tsumago-juku, I think it's like 3-hour one way, and then you can take the bus back.
That's true.
Which is kind of nice. So you can park in Magome. And
yeah.
I would probably do it that way, because even though it was a pretty steep climb up Magome, it's like a bunch of shops on that street, and it's interesting, and then it's a much longer descent into Tsumago-juku. Whereas if you did it reverse,
that's true.
There'd be so much more walking.
Yeah, and we rode our bikes through the middle of the town.
Yeah, I don't know if that was frowned upon.
Yeah, there were signs saying you can't take a motorcycle there, but we didn't see any signs that said specifically bicycle, so we were like, well, we'll just go for it. And it was still kind of early in the day.
No, it was like 11:30, so I did feel kind of bad, because people were
10.
I don't know. People were definitely like out. It was no longer like early morning.
But it was really funny because there were so many people, and like as you rode by people, they're like, "Sugoi."
Yeah.
it was like kind of felt encouraging, but also I felt kind of like.
I was kind of in the way, but also I was like, wow, I'm getting so much encouragement.
Yeah. So that was like a fun experience, but
I just rode really slow.
I probably wouldn't ride my bike through there again.
I didn't cut anyone off, like, so it was not.
Yeah, I would always wait for like plenty of space and openings to pass anybody. But that was like really cool. But where we ended up, I guess first we ended up along another river, and we got to lay in the river.
Yeah, thank
which
goodness.
Was really nice.
The Araragi River.
Yeah.
Araragi.
And so we laid in the river, got to relax, got to change clothes, and then we got to check into what was probably both of our favorite guest house.
Yeah.
That I've probably maybe ever stayed. Like this
it was
ranked
one of my
up
top
there.
3. Like, ever.
This is probably up there with the ryokan we stayed in Miyajima.
Yeah.
This was like neck and neck with that. But we stayed in this super cool guest house called
Shimo-chojiya.
Yeah, Shimo-chojiya, which I had to look it up because he kind of explained it, but I was still a little confused. He basically said like, oh, it's the name of a shop that sometimes people use in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, what does that mean?
Okay, that's vague. But he didn't know the English, like how to explain it in English. And
I
was like, I'll just look it up later.
But it was kind of hard to look up. Eventually I found it on a website. So choji is the Japanese name for clove spice. And cloves were an important ingredient in traditional Chinese medicine. And they're actually preserved as a treasure in some famous temple, Todai Temple. And during the Edo period, cloves were treasured as a lucky item. So many shops used the name choji, or choji-ya, ya means shop, to wish for successful business. And so choji-ya is like a kind of formal shop name, meaning like clove spice shop, which really just was like for good luck. So it was Shimo-chojiya.
It's interesting you don't even like have to sell clove spice. You're just like, a shop.
Yeah, you just kind of tossed it in your name. And that was really popular in the Edo period, which was something like 1600 to 1800, or maybe even before that, like 1430 to 1830. It was like a long period, but that was like a popular name. And it's interesting because that shows how old the building we were staying in was.
The Edo period's from 1600 to the late 1800s, or 1860s.
Okay. And the place was so old because Suzuki-san, who owned it, was the 14th generation of his family.
Which is mind-blowing. Like, being American, our country's not old, and to talk to somebody who's lived in the same house the 14th generation, and he had a baby. The baby is 15th generation.
15th generation baby.
Fascinating.
Because how many generations does America even go back? 5?
I mean, it depends on how quickly you're having
and
kids,
also,
I guess,
we're going to talk about, like, European white America. I guess the foundation of America, so 1776.
The foundation of the United States of America.
Yeah, not
like, truly the original people that were there.
But anyway, this guy was, 14th generation, which is wild.
It is. Yeah, and I wanted to talk to him more about what it would be like to grow up in that town, like, as a kid, because it's his grandmother's house. I mean, it's, of course, generations back, but to him, it's his grandmother's house that he grew up in with his parents, and then he's still living there with his kid now. That's such an interesting... That alone is interesting, but just to see that town change, like, for example, I asked him where he was going to take his kid. I don't know, that maybe was too personal of a question for our host, like, where's your kid going to go to school? But he said that the school in this town it closed 20 years ago, so that was probably his school when he was a kid.
Yeah, I was thinking that he probably went to high school there, because I think he said it was a high school, and so I was thinking, like, he probably did go there, and then it closed.
Yeah, which is interesting, and so he's going to have to take his kid to, like, a nearby town, like, I think it's, like, 30 minutes away, maybe, and I don't know, I told him, like, I'm just curious, and I grew up in a town where we drove 30 minutes to our school, and so, there's a lot of, like, pros and cons of countryside living, but it's different because it's countryside living, but, like, in a tourist spot, and so people go there to kind of, like,
come to you.
See a slice of history, but then at the same time, like, he wants to preserve and he respects that history. I mean, he's running this guest house and keeping everything very traditional, because I'm sure he has respect for it, but then at the same time, like, he's got to live his life. He likes
also, gaming. He was a gamer.
And, like, his son is going to want to, like, play with other kids. I don't know.
He mentioned that's one of the 3 rules of the town, actually, was that, he can't change. Yeah. He can change the interior of the house. But
the inside was still very traditional. But he said the 3 rules to live there are you can't sell, you can't lease, and you can't destroy.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I'm sure that they have a rule about if you want to remodel, the outside has to stay the same. Yeah. And I wonder if they also give you, like, what's not supplement, but, like, they give you money.
Like tax incentives and stuff, like government
I wonder
funds.
If they kind of incentivize upkeep. Like, you're not even allowed to drive on the road in front of your house during most hours of the day. They're very strict.
Well, he wouldn't be able to drive to his house.
Yeah, his was on a dirt road. He had a back way, but I don't know, it was just, like, interesting to think about growing up there.
Yeah, but this was actually the one, if you listen to the last podcast, this was the place that I found this crazy website that was made in the 90s, and I emailed him.
And it worked.
Yeah, and it somehow worked. This was that place. And I could tell, like, when we showed up, I think he was a little scattered. And, like, so he said that essentially what had happened was he was, like, running the guest house on Airbnb, and business was crazy. And then COVID happened, and then they had their kid, and so business really was non-existent.
Yeah, it, like, closed, and then when they had the kid, he never reopened.
Yeah, he said that they kind of reopened, but he's really not advertising it right now because
even now, he
didn't want to be busy.
He's not on... The only way you can get the house is if you find if you click the website through the Google, it's just on Google Maps.
No, well, it's not even on Google Maps. You have to copy and paste the name off of Google Maps, Google the name in kanji, and then a website pops up, and then you can click on the website, and then it has an email address.
So it's not, like, hidden, but it's definitely not being advertised.
No, and so he mentioned that it's been nice, like, to spend time with his kid, and he's thinking about how to advertise in the future, because I guess he doesn't want to be too busy. But it was just really, like, a pretty, like, fascinating experience. And then on top of that, the house was, like, beautiful.
The house was so beautiful. Like, so I had coffee today with my friends, and they were like, okay, we want to see your pictures, but the one you posted about they were like, what was the window that Zeb was sitting in front of where it was a huge window and there was a tree outside, and I was like, I know exactly what you're talking about. And they just wanted to see that house. Like, and even when we were outside the house, people would walk by and take pictures. Like,
yeah, everyone came up to his front door. Like,
yeah,
they like, I mean, I guess they were expecting, because it's a historic place and there are a lot of shops nearby, I guess they were expecting maybe that this house was like a shop or some kind of exhibit.
I mean, it wasn't in, but people were like, wow, and it's just like this man's home.
Yeah.
But it was that impressive.
Meanwhile, he was like up in his room playing Apex Legends, like gaming. It was really funny.
Because I told them that when we were checking in, we waited outside for a while because I wasn't sure like how rude I was going to be, because when you arrive, it's again a house and there's no check-in, like there's no desk. So his door was wide open, which I don't know, I was surprised by.
I guess
like,
just for airflow.
Yeah, but like anyone could just walk right in,
yeah.
which I don't know, he wasn't bothered, but I was just kind of like walked in and was like, hello.
Well, we did it a couple times and no one answered.
Yeah, I was
and
like,
then finally, like, I
Sumimasen.
tried to call him and he didn't answer his phone. And then you walked in and yelled Sumimasen, and he like came like running downstairs.
Yeah, because I yelled it like louder than I wanted to.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know what else to do besides just like yell in this man's home, because I knew he was up there because we could hear like
with the baby.
A baby.
It was like really stomping. I mean, I guess he was a toddler.
Giant baby.
Yeah, he was. Like, yeah.
It was a very cute baby. Later, when we were eating dinner, the baby like tore open the like kitchen door and like ran out of the kitchen and like did laps in the living room.
Yeah.
And it was a really cute baby, but they were like, I mean, it was like a toddler, but they were like, don't do that. And
yeah, they were like,
it's fine.
I think at one point he was like, Abenai. Like, it's fine. So yeah, he was like a very nice host, and he was such an interesting person. I would have liked to just like talk to him more. Unfortunately, we were waking up super early, so we were going to bed early, and then of course he was like hanging out with his kid and playing video games, hanging out with his wife, which I don't blame him. Like, it sounds cool.
Yeah, of course he would do that, but then I felt bad because he woke up when we woke up.
Yeah, which was crazy. And he, at first he had just put out like a couple pieces of toast, I think, just as like a nice like gesture, but then like as he was talking to us in the morning and he was figuring out what we were doing, he like he brought us some like yogurt, and then he was like, do you guys want like eggs?
Yeah, he was like, you need energy.
Yeah.
It was so friendly of him, because he didn't even have to see us off. Like, we kind of expected to just wake up, eat, and slip away.
Yeah, because we would tell people, like, the hosts, you know, like, hey, in the morning, we won't be here because we're leaving
so we would
early.
Be like, good night, and also, like, goodbye.
Yeah. So it just added an extra layer of, like, mystery to the house, because I did think he was genuinely an interesting person. So I was kind of, like, curious about him, and then, of course, the house. So
He's
I would
also
like to go back.
Much younger than I thought. Like, he was around our age, probably closer to like early 30s, like your age, but I don't know, I just pictured it being an older person because it's such an old town.
Yeah.
So yeah, we could talk a whole episode about just that place.
I know. Yeah, we should move on to day 4. So day 4 was like kind of like a really nice day, because we were going to make it from Tsumago-juku to Matsumoto, which is where kind of like the intention of this trip was. I wanted to go to Matsumoto,
like the destination.
Yeah. And so this day was 103 kilometers with 1,687 meters, or 64 miles with 5,534 feet. It took us 5 hours. And this one, it was very slow going at the start, because I had the route follow the old Nakasendo as much as we could, just because I thought it was fascinating and interesting. Wanted to see it. And then we went along the old Nakasendo, and eventually we descended down to meet the Kiso River. And then from the Kiso River, it was pretty straightforward, because we've actually driven through there before to go to a bike race.
Yeah, we talked about that on a previous podcast, like the really turquoise waters.
Yeah, the Atera River Valley and stuff like that.
So it was the same road that we'd driven on.
And so we kind of recognized it, so we didn't do a lot of stopping and sightseeing there. We were just kind of cruising through. And eventually we met the Narai River, which we followed into Shiojiri, which is like kind of the entrance of leaving the Kiso district and entering like the flatlands where Matsumoto was.
It is so interesting how flat that spot is, because it's surrounded on all sides by mountains, but it's so flat for so long. Like, I don't know, when you look like down into that valley, it's like rice fields. Yeah. And then the base of the Alps. So it's just so striking.
It was.
Yeah, Matsumoto is kind of known as the gateway to the North Alps, and so a lot of hikers will use that as their base, especially if they want to tour. There's actually a lot of, Nagano is a huge prefecture, and Matsumoto is like a really good hub if you want to tour Nagano.
Yeah, because Matsumoto is, it's a little bit kind of like Kanazawa, in that it has a little bit of everything in terms of like Japanese culture. They've got a castle, they have some historic districts, they kind of have modern stuff with like some nice modern art museums. They have like a cool little hip shopping area that was also kind of like a historic street, which is where our guest house was. But yeah, it was really nice. And definitely, like, the beginning, like I was saying, was a little bit slow because the old Nakasendo was basically straight uphill, and then we had to go up and over.
Gravelly, like kind of trail-like in some spots.
Yeah, thankfully there is a paved road that kind of parallels the trail, because there were some moments where I was like, okay, like, this
is just going to turn into dirt.
Yeah, we can't ride on that.
Yeah, or cobbles, I mean.
But yeah, so I'm glad we did it.
When we got to Matsumoto, the first thing we did actually, because I think we arrived around lunchtime, so we went to, I was kind of bonking because it was the fourth kind of like big day of, it wasn't, we hadn't had massive days on the bike, but just being out in the weather in the hot sun and just traveling, I was pretty tired. Yeah. And so we immediately went to a convenience store, and I just like ate 1 million calories and was feeling better. We bought a bunch of
food and lunch, and then we went to a laundromat.
Yeah, we took our stuff to the, that's what we did. So we bought food later. Yeah. I had like a second snack stop where I like ate a bunch of calories.
The first snack stop, we got normal food and then rode over to the laundromat next to the convenience store.
Because up to this point, so we each had 2 kits, and so we were wearing one, and then we would wash 1 or 2 depending on, like, if we had a sink that night, we could either like wear our spare kit the next day or like wash. And that worked okay, but of course it's kind of like challenging and not the best way to wash clothes in a sink. But in the Nakasendo, in the like guest house, they hadn't dried, and so the next morning we like took our damp clothes and like put them back in our bags and like put damp kits back on. It was a little unpleasant, so we went straight to a laundromat to like properly wash everything. So
this was like a day that it was really fun, but it felt really good to finish it. One, because the next day was the rest day, which was going to be really nice. So we didn't do a lot of stopping and sightseeing along the way. We did get to see the halfway point of the Nakasendo, which was just on this random street, and there happened to be a little pole that was like, this is the halfway point. We were like, okay. So we saw that, but also this day we were racing the typhoon. Yeah,
there happened to be a typhoon that was coming in. It ended up being perfect timing because we got to where we needed to be before the rain started, and then we just didn't have to bike the next day.
Yeah, the only bummer about this time was that the guest house check-in was a little bit later. It was at 4 instead of 3, which really was fine, and I think for most people it would be fine, but we were like...
Yeah, we were in gross clothes and...
Yeah, I just really wanted to shower. Yeah. We wanted to lay down.
And because we had really nice bikes that, that's like our main transportation and like the nicest thing we own, we don't really just want to like leave them on a street while we walk around. Japan is very safe. Like, I'll leave... Maybe this is dumb, but like I'll leave my bag at the table to like go get something and come back. Like, like I don't feel like it's scary or people are going to steal things, but I'm also not going to just like leave my bike.
Yeah, because we're also not naive, so we don't want to just leave some of our biggest investments just on the side of the road, not locked up, which next time we should take our bike lock.
We should have just taken a lock.
Take it with us, but even then sometimes I have a fear of like, what if someone like took my wheels? Yeah. Even the wheels of my bike, like, expensive.
Or we just couldn't go anywhere if someone took your wheels. We'd be stranded. But
that was really nice, and we got checked in, and that night we had, like, a really series of, like, really lucky events with, like, the guest houses, the typhoon, just the weather. And then it happened to be we arrived in Matsumoto the day of Lake Suwa's 75th fireworks festival, which is the first time they hosted it in 4 years due to COVID. Yeah.
And this isn't just any like silly little like we'll shoot some fireworks off because it's a Saturday. There's like 40,000 fireworks that they shoot off. There were so many that like your body vibrates because they're so loud and so close.
Some of them were so big they would go up and it would blow up, and you could tell it had gone so high in the air because it would like blow up and then it would take like a second, almost like lightning, and then the sound would like hit your body, and it was just like and did it in like little waves where almost every single time it was like a mini finale.
Yeah.
Like they didn't do like one and then everyone would like clap and then they'd be like one.
That's what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, it maybe started like that. But then it was just like chaos.
Yeah.
It was wild.
They would like wait a minute, I guess, to light all of them. But then like for 30 seconds, it would be like you couldn't look away. Like there was just so much exploding, which I really liked that because, yeah, I guess I was expecting it to be like one by one.
Yeah, it was wild.
The only thing that was really frustrating, and this was also probably because I was hangry, but there was such a lack of food. Like
they didn't have like any festival food.
No, they had food stalls, but the amount of people that were there, I mean, the food stalls should have been for like a couple hundred people festival, and there were thousands of people, and so the food lines were, each line I'm sure was an hour long, because we waited in a line for an hour, and yeah, it was ridiculous. And they had one convenience store on the block because they shut the city down. You couldn't drive into it, so you had to take the train and then walk from the train a couple blocks to the lake. And there was one convenience store, and the convenience store had like police officers and like, I don't know, traffic directors like guiding the line of people because there was a line coming out of the convenience store that was so long.
It was wild. So that was the only part about the fireworks festival I wasn't a big fan of. That I felt a little bit like which we did, pay way too much money for festival food that wasn't even like my favorite Japanese festival food. It was like
some fried stuff on skewers. Yeah. And it was expensive.
We got to see the fireworks. They were super beautiful.
They were so impressive.
Definitely. I would want to see them again in the future, but I would definitely take snacks with me.
Yeah. We went kind of hungry, planning to eat dinner there.
Yeah, because we were like, oh, there will be festival food. Yeah. And then
so we kind of messed up with that. Yeah. But next time, if we're that lucky again, then we know.
So we left a little bit early because there were so many people and we wanted to get on the train. And then also everyone was kind of worried about the typhoon coming through. So there were all these like warnings that like the next day the train wouldn't be running.
You couldn't go to Nagano. Nagoya. You couldn't go to Nagoya. Like they had already closed the lines. So we were like, well, we got to make it because the train was 45 minutes from Matsumoto. So
which was also very convenient timing because the next day was our rest day. So we didn't have to wake up early. So we did get back on the train and we headed back to Matsumoto and crawled into our little bunk beds because this was more of a hostel.
It was. Yeah, they were bunk beds. Like Zeb was in the boys' room when I was in the girls' room.
I was in the mixed room. Yeah. And you were in the girls' only dormitory.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then we had no alarms the next, maybe we had an alarm, but it was like 7:30 instead of 4 a.m.
Yeah, I think I slept like 10 or 11 hours.
Yeah. So we woke up and we had like a full day in Matsumoto to see the city and then kind of explore.
As a fun fact about Matsumoto, the kanji mean base of a pine tree, which is, I think, fun.
That is fun.
Yeah. And so the guest house itself, I guess we talked for so long about the Nakasendo guest house, and this was like a very opposite experience. They were both really nice and cool, but like for totally different reasons.
Yeah, because this one, it was more of like a true like youth hostel experience.
It felt very like, you know when you backpack through Europe and you stay in like, I don't know, European hostels? Yeah. It felt like that, but we were in Japan.
Yeah.
And it was owned by a couple. The wife was Japanese and the man was American, and so that was interesting to talk to him.
Yeah, he was a super nice guy too. Yeah. He was like another person that I would have been more interested in talking to more.
Yeah.
But it's funny because, I mean, they owned a cafe underneath the guest house, so they were like crazy busy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because that next day after, we'll go back to what we did on the rest day, but that next day he woke up also at 5 a.m. So actually.
Well, he was like already awake.
That's true.
So I got out of bed and.
At like 4.
Yeah, and I was like getting stuff organized, and then I went into the kitchen, and they had like the exact same coffee grinder that we have. It's like a little handheld grinder, so I was using it. And then all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, like I see someone, and I was like, oh, it's not Annie. And it was this guy, Chris, like the guy that owns it, and I was like, oh, like, morning. And he was like, oh, you guys are up early. And I was like, yeah, like we're getting ready to get going. And I asked him, I was like, is the coffee grinder like too loud? And he was like, no, it's fine. And then he was like, I was just down in the cafe.
Like he hadn't gone to sleep yet.
Yeah, and he was like, I'm getting ready to go to bed. And I was like, dude, it's 4
Yeah, like,
a.m.
what have you been doing? Like, they must be crazy busy.
Yeah, I
like,
think
just prepping everything for the day.
Just getting stuff going. Because they also make their own food, because he disappeared for a little bit, and then he came back, and he had, like, 2 bags of granola.
Yeah.
Which was, like, so nice.
It was so friendly.
Yeah, and he was like, here's some granola to, like...
He could have just been like, well...
get you through the day.
Good night. I'll,
he didn't even have to come in. He could have just gone to bed.
But instead he went back and got us some free food. It was very friendly.
I'm saying, like, the first time, he didn't need to pop by and be like, have a safe trip or whatever. He could have just gone to bed.
It was very nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was Nawate Guest House.
Yeah, and Story House Cafe.
Yeah, and Nawate is the name of the street. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, I was trying to read, like, more about it, but it's like a frog street, kind of. And so it is right next to a river. But in one article I was reading, there was, like, kind of a bad...
It was a typhoon, right?
Yeah.
That caused a flood.
It said that, like, it flooded all the frogs away.
Washed them away.
Which is sad and confusing because frogs like water. But yeah, maybe that happened. And so they started doing kind of, like, frog-themed things. And, like, there is a shrine on that street. And they said that, like, somehow it's related to the frogs. They want them to return.
Yeah, and then there's a cool frog statue, which if you're into the anime Naruto and you think about Jiraiya, he can summon frogs. He teaches Naruto how to summon frogs. The frog statue is like the sage frogs you would think of in the anime. It's a little random aside.
Yeah.
But when I saw him, like, from my youth, I was like, oh, it's just like a Japanese anime.
Yeah. It was a cool shopping street, and a highlight was that they had a shop entirely dedicated to frogs. Like, the only things that they sold inside were frog trinket stuff, frog-themed items.
And it was called Ribbit.
Yeah, and the only music, if you can call it music, was just frog noises playing over the speakers.
It was just background sounds. Yeah, frogs.
I was a big fan. But yeah, so what did we do on our Matsumoto rest day before we move on to the biggest day?
Well, we really tried to do nothing, or as little as possible. So the main thing we did is once we were up and kind of going in the morning, it was early enough that the first thing we did, and really the only thing we both really wanted to do, was go to Matsumoto Castle.
Mm-hmm. The second castle of the trip.
Yeah, number 2. So that was, like, the main thing. And Matsumoto is one of Japan's 12
original castles that are left. So Japan has a ton of castles, and a lot of them are, because they're made of wood, they've been burned down or just rotted.
Or just, like, in war or earthquakes.
So all most of the castles that are in Japan are replicas or, like, rebuilt. Like, Kanazawa Castle, for example, was very recently rebuilt, like, this century.
Yeah.
Or maybe not in the 2000s, but, like, in the 90s.
Yeah.
And so it's, of course, built to scale and built to look exactly the same. But Matsumoto is very unique because it's one of 12 that are truly the same building. And it's not the whole same building, but the wooden keep is still the same, like, main part, which is really cool. It's over 400 years old from 1595. And so it's also a very dark castle, which kind of looks unique, but the black color, sometimes people call it the Karasujo, which is Crow Castle.
Yeah, that one was, like, really cool. And it was fun. We paid, of course, to, like, walk through it and get to experience it. And it's good we got there when we did, because as we were leaving, because the castle is so vertical and the stairs are so steep, it's kind of, like, difficult to traverse, but not many people can go through it very quickly.
You have to, like, wait for one person to come up before you can come down.
Yeah.
So it gets really crowded and, like, kind of blocked off.
Yeah, when we got there was no line. And when we were leaving, I think they were saying it was, like, at least an hour wait to even, like, get into the castle.
And then once you're in, the tour takes an hour.
Yeah.
So that would have been, just a whole different experience.
Yeah. And so I also really liked, my favorite thing about that castle, which made it one of 2 in Japan, was the moon viewing room.
I didn't realize only 2 castles have a moon viewing room.
Yeah, apparently only 2 castles, and that one it's very prominent because the moon viewing room is, like, a symbol of, like, Japan's peacetime, because it's not a strategic... It's basically, like, just a huge open-air room attached to the castle. Yeah,
and it has, like, huge windows.
Yeah, so if you wanted to, like, invade...
fortress.
Yeah, if you wanted to invade the castle, you would just go through the moon viewing room. So it was a symbol of, like, peacetime in Japan when they were, like, really no longer at war with each other. But apparently there are only 2 castles in Japan that have a moon viewing room. And it's just such a nice, like, idea that it meant so much that they built a room
with a lot of windows just to look at the sky. Yeah. We took a picture for your mom. She might be listening, but she loves moons, so it made us think of her. Not moons. She loves the moon that we have.
Yeah, the moon. Although she also loves moons, because when she was a kid, she thought there were 2 moons. Okay. Well, she needed glasses. Oh. So apparently when she was a kid, she would talk about seeing 2 moons in the sky, and people were like, you're crazy, and it's because her vision was really bad. Anyway, yeah, so that was like the main part about the day. And then the next thing we wanted to do is go visit a coffee shop / bike shop. And that was like really nice because along the way, Matsumoto is known for its pristine water. Mm-hmm. And so all throughout the city, there are like these wells that you can stop by and visit. And they have their like little placards that are like, this has been officially tested and this is like good it's water. To drink. And
Yes, you can just drink it right out of the little spigot thing. But it's interesting because unlike a hot spring, it's cool. Like it's cool spring water. I guess I'm not surprised because back in Western North Carolina, there's a lot of mountain springs like that. Mm-hmm. But when I was telling my friends, they were like, so it was hot. And I was like, no, it wasn't onsen water. It was just spring water.
Yeah. But that was like really nice. So that was very fun to sample Matsumoto's pristine waters. And then we got a really nice coffee from like a pretty funny, it was like an old townhouse area and they've been converted into shops. Mm-hmm.
Like
and so it was like a really...
Yeah,
pretty area, and the bike shop was very cool. Mm-hmm. But then we really just tried to walk as little as possible that day, although we ended up, that was our biggest day of walking.
Well, it's hard because the other days we didn't walk at all. We just rode bikes. But yeah, I felt pretty rested, and I needed to be because day 6 was Matsumoto to Shirakawa-go. So it was 150 kilometers, 2,732 meters. Or 93 miles and 9,000 feet, which is a big day anytime. But it took us 7 hours, which was a lot more if you count all the stops. But I don't know, I felt really proud when we finished, very relieved and happy.
Yeah, this was an interesting day, and we jokingly kept calling it our Queen Stage, which... In cycling, the term Queen Stage is used to refer to the hardest day of a multi-day stage race. So think Tour de France. And it's almost always in the high mountains, and it's usually the longest day with the most amount of elevation and the most climbing. So for reference, I just thought that was interesting. This year's Queen Stage of the Tour de France was stage 19, and that was 166 kilometers or 103 miles with 5,000 meters or 16,404 feet of elevation, and that was on day 19.
So like tour. Twice as many feet as we had,
which is crazy.
16,000 feet in one day that's bananas. Just brutal.
But anyway, so it was our personal Queen Stage, and this was another interesting one because we'd actually driven on parts that we were riding when we were going from Shirakawa-go, which was a few podcast episodes ago.
And that was when I had the race at the Shimano race. We were leaving.
And it's interesting because it's one of the really like 2 or 3 mountain passes that you can use to get over the Alps to go from Nagano into Gifu. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you have to come up from the south like we did or go out through the north. Like
you can get on an expressway and go like up to the coast, like to Joetsu and then like the Sea of Japan and then across, and that's actually because you're on an expressway, it's about the same amount of time as cutting through the mountains. But we cut through the mountains by car because we wanted to save money, and then by bike because that was the only thing that made sense. Because
we could have ridden north, but that would have probably added a day or two to our trip. So we decided like, we'll just go up and over the Hida Mountains. And originally, I talked about this last episode, this is where I was planning on going across the Norikura skyline. But I found out through looking at Google reviews that due to a landslide, it's currently closed to traffic.
Yeah, which thank goodness you found that out before we were like there trying to get onto it. That would have been such a bummer.
Yeah, so we figured out like, well, we could take this other route to go up and over, which thankfully I actually did know about because our buddy Kyle, when he visited, he had actually descended this way to get into Matsumoto. So we climbed the way he descended. And it was good to get up early because it's a really busy road because like I was saying, it's only like I think 1 of 2 climbs you can take, and then it was really popular, I guess, with like hiking and sightseeing. So they had like buses you could get on called the Highland Express, and I was wondering, they must go to like Takayama or do some like tour of the region.
Yeah, there were so many like big tour buses on this road.
Yeah, big tour buses and trucks.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of tunnels. So if you were
the
not...
tunnels were kind of spooky because there was no shoulder in the tunnels. Like, they were small mountain tunnels. And you could see the end, and it was like...
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes. It was, it was perfectly fine to be on a bike on those, but just because it was so busy. However, at the top of that, there was a tunnel, and the tunnel was very clear. No bikes, no pedestrians.
Yeah, because it's a toll tunnel, or like a little expressway tunnel, and it's fairly new.
It's really long, too. Like, we drove through it. I mean, it took at least 20 minutes to drive just in the tunnel.
It's a long drive. They just, like, burrowed straight through this crazy mountain.
It was crazy, which is so, like, in itself, like, fascinating to think about building a tunnel like that. But anyway,
you can't ride.
We couldn't do that.
There's a big sign when you get there, and it's like, if you need to go through the tunnel and you're a pedestrian, or you need a taxi or a bus. But what they don't tell you is there is an adjacent road that continues climbing up, and you climb up.
The Akandanayama?
Yeah, Akandanayama.
There's
so you
probably
climb
a
up
better
that,
way to say that. But yeah.
and you descend down the other side, and that's how you get into Gifu. And that was an interesting climb because the adjacent mountain, which is Mount Yake, is an active volcano. And so the whole time you're actually going up, the higher you get, you can start smelling sulfur, and you can see like steam rising from the river, and then it starts to take on kind of this, I guess, just volcanic landscape, kind of with that like greenish sulfuric color. And so it's really interesting.
Banks, it was kind of clayey. Like, the higher you climb, the river changes.
Yeah,
because I guess that hot water is mixing.
And I guess because it's so volcanic, there have been like so many landslides, and it's just an interesting scenery. But yeah, on the way up and over, we ran into a bunch of monkeys. Yeah. Which was pretty fun.
Like 20 monkeys.
Yeah, so many monkeys.
And I still am very wary of monkeys, but these monkeys were way more chill than any of the other monkeys we'd seen. Like, you're not supposed to look monkeys in the eye. But these monkeys, like, two of them were, like, laying on the road. One was, like, cleaning the other one, like, picking at it.
So as we approached it, I thought it was, like, a sad scene where his monkey friend had been, like, hit by a car.
I did, too, because he was so still.
Bad. Yeah.
But he wasn't. He was just chilling, and he didn't even get up or anything, and he just, like, moved his little head to watch us as they, like, just kept laying in the road.
And there were baby monkeys.
Yeah.
It was...
One monkey, like, looked right at me and yawned, and I thought it was like a hiss or a growl, but it was definitely a yawn, because earlier we had been yelled at by monkeys.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I forgot about that.
So these monkeys were, like, super chill. I still didn't, like, stop or, like, really get close.
Moving.
Like, you're not supposed to look monkeys in the eye, but
at least not
I appreciated
in the
those.
monkey garden in Kyoto. But yeah, that was like a really fascinating way to get up and over. And thankfully that road was totally open, so no worries. And then from there, it was like a really long descent. There was like one more climb. And then after that, a really long descent. I actually did meet back up with Takayama. And then we rode through Hida again, or adjacent to Hida. And yeah.
We started getting caught by rain clouds once we got back into Hida. So that was kind of a bummer. But because we were going, so the ride that day ended with a 2,700 foot climb in like 10 miles.
Yeah.
Which was a bummer. But because it was raining, it was actually really nice that we didn't have like the hot beating sun, because it would have been like about the heat of the day, because it was about noon by the time.
I think if the rain wasn't there, it probably would have been like
miserable.
36 degrees Celsius, which is what, like 98 Fahrenheit.
And there's a pretty exposed climb, and so I was very, I don't know, as happy as you can be to ride in the rain. I was glad.
The rain was so much, and it was actually cooled off so much that going down the other side into Shirakawa-go, I was so cold on the descent. I was like freezing.
Yeah.
Which was like kind of funny. I mean, it was like, summertime, and I was like shivering. But
and it did block off the view. There was supposed to be like a really cool view. That was a bummer, but yeah, maybe we can go back another time when it's not like the heat of the summer and just enjoy the whole thing.
Yeah, this would be a beautiful... This whole
like
route,
a fall route.
Yeah, it would have been beautiful in the fall. But this was an interesting point where, like, again, looking stuff up for this, I came across this thing because I was reading. I was like, sometimes I'll click around and just read Google reviews, or there might be like a scenic spot listed on Google Maps, and I would click on it. And actually there was one for this route. So the route that was 360, and we went up and over the Amo Pass to descend into Shirakawa-go. Apparently the Amo Pass just opened, like, in June of this year.
Like it was snowy for that long?
No, it was just like closed, I guess, due to landslides and stuff.
Wow.
So like just recently it reopened. So I'm
goodness.
glad it was open. But I was reading like these Google reviews about the Amo Pass, and they were talking about how like this one guy was like, "Oh, I'm so glad I got to like experience it because it's been closed for so long from the Shirakawa-go side." So he'd like ridden his motorcycle up it and then left a Google review. But then one review was like, "Oh, it's usually a very busy road from the Shirakawa-go side, but if you get onto the Miyagawa side, it's usually not busy." And they were like, also, when you cross the Miyagawa River, if you go to this bus stop, this is the bus stop from the movie Your Name, which I thought was like fascinating. I was like, what does that even mean?
Which, that's like an anime movie from 2016, I think, that was one of the most successful recent anime movies that got released.
Yeah.
It's actually really good. And
it is really good.
I don't watch very much anime. We've already been over that.
Yeah.
But I really liked that movie. And I didn't realize, like, I knew that it was loosely based. The girl is from a rural town and the guy's from Tokyo. And I knew that there were very obvious Tokyo scenes in the movie, like in the drawing animations and stuff. And that's cool. But, you know, everybody knows Tokyo sites. I didn't realize that her, like, rural town was heavily based in the Hida Takayama area. Like, her actual town is made up, but very based on Lake Suwa. And then if you see, like, when he first starts his search for her, he goes to Hida Takayama train station. And it looks exactly like the train station.
And
it's
there's
so
some
crazy.
point, too, when they're on the search, where they're in a bus stop. And that's the bus stop. We actually rode by it. We didn't know at the time.
Yeah.
But I found it on Google, and I clicked on it, and it has like 58 Google reviews, and all the reviews are like, "This is the bus stop from Your Name."
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Apparently there's a guest book, or like they called it like a pilgrimage book in there that you can like sign. And yeah, so there's like a list somewhere, and it's like anime's most sacred spots. And this is on that list of places you can go, which I guess makes sense that the artists use real world references, but then they combine them to make like fake towns.
Yeah.
So they just kind of take a bunch of...
Apparently the artist is from Nagano, which is cool.
That is cool.
Because he didn't have to make it. He could have just, like, based it on things that are unrelated and far away but pretty, but he chose to, like, make it from one area. That's cool.
And it's just so funny because like it just makes me think about that specific bus stop. At some point he must have like driven by it, and then in his head thought, like, when he was like, I need a bus stop, like, oh, let's use that one.
Because it's fairly unremarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a rural forest bus stop.
Yeah.
It's not...
I think, why'd he use it? Like, he could have just
exceptional.
imagined a bus stop in his head and drawn it.
But it's cool. It's like a little Easter egg in a movie.
Yeah, it's really interesting. But you can actually look up guides. Like, if you come to Japan and you're really into anime, you can look up guides for famous sites, and then you can go see them in the real world and leave a Google review.
Yeah.
And even the name of it, it's like the Omachai, like, famous Your Name bus stop scene is like the name of the location on Google. It's really funny.
Yeah, because otherwise, why would you go?
Yeah, exactly. Like, who?
The poor, like, grandmas that use that bus stop regularly are like, these dang kids are clogging up my bus stop.
Someone did say in a Google review, it was around the time the movie came out, they said that while they were there were like 5 groups of people that came to it. Yeah.
That's really surprising.
I know. Yeah.
I don't think I would do that. Maybe if it was like my favorite movie ever. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it is cool that, like, in a cartoon you can go see it in real life.
Yeah. But so we made it up and over that pass, past the famous bus stop, descended into Shirakawa-go, and then made it to our final guest house of the stay, which was Guest House K, that we've actually stayed at before. Yeah. So a long time ago, almost a year ago now, if you were listening to the podcast and you listened to an episode about how we went to Shirakawa-go, it's the same guest house we stayed in then.
The opposite direction from Kanazawa over. Yeah, so we were back. This time we were in his shared, like, the bunk room.
A year ago we stayed in a private room.
But because when we were there last time, Japan hadn't opened yet, so he didn't have a lot of people staying, and so it was pretty busy this time.
Yeah, there were a lot of people.
So there wasn't a private room available, but the bunk room was like perfectly comfortable.
Yeah, I thought it was nice.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about his guest house is that he's got like this huge snack cabinet, and everything in it is 150 yen. Like the cup noodles, the drinks, the chips, the snacks.
Impressively, it's cheaper than the convenience store.
Yeah, some are cheaper. Like, I guess it all evens out because the cup noodles are 150. I don't know. The cup noodles probably are like at least that in the convenience store.
Yeah.
But
I mean, he had the nice chips, the Calbee chips.
Yeah.
In the convenience store, those are like 200 yen or something.
Yeah. This is very nice because you don't have to go anywhere, and you're like, oh, I'll just buy these chips.
Yeah, so because it was raining when we made it up and over, it was still raining when we got to the guest house.
And so
thankfully
chips.
we like immediately were able to take hot showers, which they let us check in a little early, which was
also
super
very
nice. And then we were able to get like cup noodle and chips, and we didn't have to leave the guest house. So.
But that night, that was the second. Was that only the second time we ate out? Did we eat out in Matsumoto? No, we didn't because we went to the festival.
No, pretty much the whole time we were eating in convenience stores.
Yeah, so it was just the izakaya, which was also our guest house, and then
we ate lunch in Tsumago-juku at a soba shop.
Oh yeah, that's right. But yeah, other than that, we always ate convenience store food because it was just so easy, and we just wanted to like get calories quickly. But to celebrate, we actually ate at a restaurant on that. It was like the final night before we were in our home again.
Yeah.
So we had one more day left, but it was pretty much a celebration. And so,
yeah, because thankfully the last day was the shortest day, and we had done it before.
I guess it was the shortest day.
Yeah.
I think it was 64 miles, not 54.
No, 87 kilometers.
Oh, okay. Well, so we celebrated by eating some Hida beef, which we don't eat a lot of meat, but...
Yeah, pretty much, like, I guess we were vegetarian for a long time, and now I would say somewhat regularly eat chicken. Maybe like once a week.
Like once a week. I don't know how regular that is.
Yeah, maybe like a couple times a month we might eat some chicken. But we like very rarely eat beef. But this was like a unique experience because everyone was like...
Because the Hida area is like known for Hida beef, and it's the same black... I don't remember what kind of cows they are, but it's the same cows that like Wagyu is
or like
the same
Kobe beef
cattle.
And stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, everyone was like, oh, like the Hida beef.
You should try this. And it honestly was really good. Because if I'm going to eat beef like twice a year, I'd like to eat the highest quality from hopefully happy cows. So yeah, had like the very juicy beef or whatever.
And also it was a yakiniku restaurant, and it was like the one of only restaurants that's open for dinner. I think there were only two, and one was reservation only. Yeah. So. And last time we ate at a restaurant, I had a coworker call and make a reservation so they would be open so we could go. So there's not a lot for dinner going on in Shirakawa-go.
But the Hida beef was really delicious. And you could also get, so like one plate of beef, we got the second nicest cut, I guess.
Yeah, I think there were like 4 different cuts, and we got the one below the top cut. And I think it was 3,000 yen.
I think it was 35.
Was it 35? The top one was like 5,000 or something.
Yeah. So like each piece was like 500 yen, which is pretty expensive because it was like 6 or 7 pieces. Yeah. But yeah, we just got one. There's like set meals that you can each have like your own beef tray.
Yeah, but those were expensive.
Yeah. So we got like one fancy beef
and
like
then a bunch
thing,
of cheap stuff.
And then like some rice sets.
Yeah. It was really good, and that was like a good kind of final dinner for our final night. And of course, we went back to the guest house, went to bed pretty early once again. But we woke up the next day not quite as early.
Yeah, we slept until 5.
Yeah, we didn't have as far to go. But it was nice because we got up, everything was packed, put everything on the bikes, and then we went and took a little victory lap around Shirakawa-go, which really is like in the morning, just the best time like peaceful. To be there. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we headed back. They played like a morning wake up at 6:30 in the morning in Shirakawa-go.
It was really funny.
And they played like radio taiso with like radio taiso. Yeah. Which my friends have told me, they're like, if you're Japanese, you know how to dance to it. But it's like not a dance, but it's like it's
kind of stretching. But
yeah, it's like stretching it's like a morning exercise. Workout. But so my friends they're probably in their 60s, they said that when they were in elementary school, their school would give them like a stamp sheet, and during summer break, if you did radio taiso every day and you got a stamp each day, I don't know who stamps it, but if you like did the morning exercise, you would get like some prize when you got back to school. And it's supposed to be like instilling good habits and like keeping you healthy. It's really, I don't think it's really that, I mean, it's fine. It's just kind of like stretching.
Yeah, people have said it's really not a workout. Like if that's all you're relying on to like stay fit, it's probably not enough.
Yeah, and it's also not, I don't know, it's not like yoga either.
It's kind of like a lot of like waving your arms around.
Yeah,
and, like,
just getting the blood flowing.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it, but yeah, it's funny
it's good
how
for elderly people, I guess.
She was saying that like, yeah, when we were in elementary school, they wanted to make sure we did our radio taiso every day.
But yeah, so we did our little victory lap. We got to hear the 6:30 a.m. like Ohayo gozaimasu through the loudspeakers. And then we hit the road, and that day, it was 87 kilometers with 1,247 meters of climbing. It was 54 miles and 4,100 feet, and it took us a little under 4 hours.
It felt so much longer than that.
This one was pretty good, though,
tired.
because it was basically what we did the last time, but I cut out the nonsense. Last time we tried to take like a little mountain path that devolved into like a goat trail that ended with some hiking. This time we just took the road straight there.
We saw 3 different gassho, which is the name for like hands in prayer or something, but it's like thatched roof hands in prayer houses. So we saw 3 different little towns. Of course, Shirakawa-go is the biggest, possibly most known one in that area. But Gokoyama is pretty well known too, just a lot smaller. And then there was another one that I can't remember the name of. Ainokura, which was very quaint.
Probably the smallest one.
Yeah.
But that one was fun because instead of riding like through a tunnel, we took this kind of like little back road up through Ainokura, and yeah, it was really nice. My least favorite part about that day, for some reason in that stretch of roads in Gifu, there were so many flies, like biting flies.
Oh yeah.
Like a lot.
When we got back, I had so many bites on my legs. I was shocked.
It was crazy.
I was going to say my least favorite part was the lack of food stops. Like there was no snack option from
that day,
like the whole time, honestly.
We basically had to rely on vending machines, and then there's one Yamazaki Daily, but it's kind of out of the way.
Yeah, you'd have to ride like an extra 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Which is a bummer. And it was like far enough that I was like, let's just skip it. But that was kind of a bad choice because I got like, I don't know, the low blood sugar feeling, like where you're kind of
by the
shaky.
end you were like a little
I was pretty like shattered.
Yeah, you're a little over it. But I guess we should have honestly just stopped at more.
I just needed a little more
also,
calories.
Yeah, to get more like drinks and stuff. But yeah, it was really nice, especially once we made it out of Gifu, out of the Sho River Valley, back into Toyama, because that was like truly the home road feeling. Like I was returning to roads that I've ridden pretty regularly on longer training rides. And so that was like a really good feeling because I was like, okay, like I don't even need my computer anymore, and I know how to make it home. Like I didn't need GPS. Like, yeah, it was a good feeling.
Yeah. So we went through Iwaku Onsen and to the Asanagawa bike path, which we talked about that. Like that's the way we go into town almost, not every day anymore, but like at least twice a week for classes.
Yeah.
And so
like we ride our bikes into town.
Yeah. It just goes along one of the 2 rivers that's in Kanazawa. So we finished on that very familiar bike path. I got the QOM on it, actually.
I know, I saw that.
Because, like Zeb said, I was a little over it. I was just so, like, I could feel myself that I only had a limited amount of, like, time left before I just absolutely...
What's that phrase when the...
Like
something about the horse can, smell the barn door or something. It's like Annie.
Yeah, I was like, there is food in my house, and I'm so close.
Yeah.
But
and we did make it back, and it was like 10:30.
It was so early.
Yeah.
But I was like, when is it acceptable for me to go to sleep? Like...
Yeah, that was a funny like adjustment to make, because we were used to like eating like lunch at like 10:30 or 11.
Yeah, because we'd already been riding for like 5 hours.
Yeah.
But yeah, it felt really good to be finished, and like felt very accomplished in a lot of different ways. So
yeah, and it was nice because I mean it's slow traveling, but we got to see so much. Like so many like unique and cool little places. Like I forgot to mention this, like in Kanayama, there's like the secret little labyrinth of like alleyways.
Oh yeah.
And like the guest house owner showed it to us.
Like Howl's Moving Castle.
Yeah, there's this one building that's kind of like leaning, and it has all these different layers and stuff. And he was like, oh, like how like Howl's Castle. And
and it does kind of. Yeah.
So yeah, it's just so much unique, like, well, maybe not unique, like there's probably another city in Japan that has that.
I'm sure, but
but just like really nice, kind of out of the way. It's just such a good way to travel, like by bike. But
yeah, now I'm gonna pack that bike up and ship it to America and
I know,
not ride it for like 2 weeks.
Yeah, so this weekend we fly back to America.
Yeah, I am not prepared, but
so actually our next podcast episode will be us in America.
Yeah, that's wild. And hopefully I'll tell you that I got my driver's license because
Annie does the test.
I'm
this
so
Friday.
Stressed.
Yeah, we did lessons this Monday.
Yeah.
So yesterday.
This podcast has already gone on really long, but we'll have
like
to.
An hour and a half right now.
Yeah, it was a long.
So if you've been listening,
big time.
Thank you.
Yeah, but next time we'll talk about why the driver's license test is such a big thing. So
yeah, and we can talk about Annie's experience.
Yeah,
and
I take
how
my
it
test
goes.
on Friday.
Yeah.
So send me all of the good vibes. Please.
Well, to close this out real quick, do you want to?
Oh yeah.
What's your word of the week? So mine, I'll go quickly. Mine is minshuku, which a minshuku is basically a Japanese bed and breakfast or guest house. One definition of minshuku says that they're located in rural locations where hotels and ryokans aren't needed due to the low number of visitors. So basically, it is kind of like guest house tomo. It's like a house, and the person has some rooms, and they'll rent them out.
That's cool.
But there's a big distinguishing feature that a minshuku, the person lives in it, and they rent out rooms, versus a minpaku is a private lodge. So think like Airbnb when you rent a place, but you get like the whole apartment to yourself. And so in many places in Japan, like I think Tokyo's one, I know Kyoto's one, minpaku are illegal to operate because they don't want people just buying up real estate and then renting it out on Airbnb. So you need a license to run it, and it has to be all set up legally. So minpaku are quasi-legal in some areas, definitely illegal in some places. But minshuku are kind of like the guest houses we stayed in.
That's cool. Because your host is like, all right, good night, I'll be in that room.
Yeah, they're like, I live here too.
Yeah.
And the main distinguishing feature is like the ryokan is like more of an established,
like a hotel.
Formal setting for lodging. Yeah, like a traditional Japanese hotel, where a minshuku is more like a homestay. But yeah.
Very nice. My word is seiko, which is success. And so, yeah, that's what I felt like our week was. A success. And also, you might have heard the word Seiko before because it's also the watch brand name.
Seiko.
Yeah. And so they got that because in Japanese that means success.
Wow.
Brings us to the end.
I know. This was a really long episode. So if you're still listening, I think it was interesting. But
I think talking about myself is nice.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me.
Wow.
But yeah, if you're still here, thank you for listening all the way to the end. And hopefully you enjoyed it. And of course, if you ever have any questions about cycling in Japan or bike trips in Japan or anything like this, you can feel free to email us at ramblingramsbothams@gmail.com.
My friend Sarah actually did tell us that as a tip on bike packing trips, she says you can sleep at shrines, at Shinto shrines, if you're in a pinch. She wouldn't recommend doing this, and it makes sense, not in like a city or something, but if you're in a really rural area, she said that her Japanese friends told her, and they did this one time, that you can sleep in the shrine area. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and we hope that, so when we come back from America, we hope to bring back her tent and maybe some more of our camping gear, because Annie actually carried all of her own luggage this trip. So that was another big feature. I was a big girl. Yeah. So now we have a couple bike bags so we can carry more true camping gear, because Japan really does have some wonderful campsites, and they're pretty not like American campsites. They're not very rugged. They're very nice facilities, like bathrooms, showers, sinks, barbecues, really nice places. Kind of like car camping, I guess. Yeah. So hopefully in the future we'll actually do some camping along our bike ride. But yeah, if you have any questions about bringing a bike to Japan or cycling in Japan, just shoot us an email, because we're happy to help. And I think we kind of know. Yeah, and I want to know if you've been to any anime locations in real life. Oh yeah. Maybe I'll watch that anime. But yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.